On March 24th, 2009, Bethesda Game Studios released Fallout 3's second add-on. It was called The Pit. The Pit would see the lone wanderer travel to the post-apocalyptic ruins of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it's in this ruined steel town that the lone wanderer would have to make one of the most morally ambiguous decisions the Fallout franchise has seen. Let's talk about that. This is the morality of the Pit, or what to do in a world of limited choice. First, to truly understand the moral dilemma that the Pitt DLC presents, we must first understand the history of the Pit. Oddly enough, the recent history of the Pit starts nowhere near Pittsburgh. It actually starts on the West Coast. Some 25 years before the start of Fallout 3, the Brotherhood of Steel's Elder Council decided to send a sizable force eastward to scour major cities and former military bases for advanced technology. The team was led by Paladin at the time, Owen Lyons. Accompanying the veteran Paladin was technological advisor Scribe Reginald Rothschild, Paladin Henry Kasdan, Paladin Tristan, Initiate Asher, and others. By 2255, the Brotherhood detachment finally reached the Pit, and to their dismay, the place was in utter tatters. Gangs, raiders, and mutants all vied for control of the lawless city. Irradiated waters, the Monongahela, the Allegheny, and the Ohio rivers surrounded the ruined town, making it that much more inhospitable. And so, under the guise of purging evil from this blasted earth, Lyon's Brotherhood of Steel would lay waste to the town and its inhabitants. This event would be known as the Scourge. The Scourge started at night. A group of knights and paladins, led by Lyons himself, set out into the town, eliminating anyone who dared show an inch of resistance. Lyons' soldiers were severely outnumbered, but firepower was still on their side, thanks to their advanced weaponry and power armor. By morning, the Brotherhood was done. The group was ready to move out, taking 20 or so children from the Pit with them, intent on raising them to be members of the Brotherhood of Steel. Among them, Greg Bear, who unlike his two other brothers, John and Grud, was deemed less savage and worthy of being saved. But Lyon's team was not without their own casualties, or rather casualty singular. Initiate Ishmael Asher was buried under some rubble during a skirmish and was presumed to be dead. Unbeknownst to everyone at the time, Asher would survive his injuries. Scavengers and wasters who survived the Scourge saw Asher as some sort of divine being. It is with their help and divine devotion to the fallen Brotherhood initiate that Asher would slowly be able to turn the Pit into an industrial powerhouse. But even before the Scourge and Asher's takeover, the Pit was not in good shape. The troglodyte degeneration contagion, or TDC, had been plaguing the city for centuries following the Great War. The disease would take hold of the victim, causing sores and lesions across their skin. Continued exposure would eventually lead to an alteration of the victim's brain chemistry, causing them to break psychologically. These folks would be called wild men, and even further exposure could lead to a mutagenic transformation into what locals call trogs. It's stated on a terminal that approximately 20% of adults who are exposed to the TDC will eventually become the bestial trogs. And even more tragically, children born in heavy TDC active areas have a 100% degenerative rate, causing them to turn feral within weeks of their births. For as long as the TDC was active and without a cure, the Pit would be a terribly inhospitable place for any wastelander. But where many saw death and decay, Asher saw potential. Asher took what was a battered, beaten, and hostile town and started to turn it into a home. What was once a divided and torn region started to unite under Asher's command. As word spread of this new Pennsylvanian town, it started to grow, and fast. Whenever any raiders attacked, the mighty Asher would defeat their leader and recruit the rest to be part of his own force, assigning them to be either workers or soldiers. With people, protection, and a functioning steel mill, the Pit could become one of the wasteland's most industrious cities. But the Trog contagion still prevented a key aspect of city building. It halted all natural population growth. And so Asher, in his own words, reluctantly resorted to forced unpaid labor, or what you or I would better know as slavery. Slaves would be purchased from slave hubs, like Paradise Falls, and be put to work in the steel mill, overseen by his raider army. While brutal, this unconventional means of population growth would help ensure the city's sustainability and production. Asher's army would scour the wastes for goods, food, and medicine, while the workers would be forced to craft and build weapons and ammo for them. This setup would work for a while, but to Asher, it was always temporary. The Trog contagion needed to be cured. Asher and the Pit would be blessed with some good fortune when a wasteland scientist, Sandra Kundanika, asked for entry to the Pit. Sandra would be tasked with coming up with a cure for the TDC. While working, Sandra and Asher developed romantic feelings for each other, and Sandra would give birth to baby Marie 1 year prior to the start of Fallout 3. Their daughter proved to be an unlikely breakthrough for their progress on the cure. Baby Marie turned out to be immune to the mutations and radiation of the Pit. With a cure to the Trog disease on the horizon, Asher would finally be given the opportunity to stop his slavery practices, as the Pit would be able to rely on natural sustainability instead of outside sources. But Asher isn't the only main player part of the Pit's history. Every leader needs a good second-in-command, and for Asher, that was a red-headed man named Werner. Werner was a former lieutenant for the Pitt Raiders. However, shortly before the start of Fallout 3, according to the Fallout 3 game guide, Werner attempted to overthrow Asher's rule and take command of the Pit for himself. This attempt failed, and the former raider was exiled into slavery. Infuriated with Asher and slave life, Werner managed to escape the Pit, but not before plotting a slave revolt with de facto slave leader Medea. Werner would flee to the capital wasteland, where he would set up a distress call, beckoning adventurous wastelanders for their help. This takes us to the start of the DLC, which is surprisingly quite short. There's only like 3 main quests. After tracking down the source of the distress signal, the lone wanderer will find a camped-out Werner fending off against a couple of Pit raiders. After securing the area, Werner explains that he needs your help to free his people from a group of bloodthirsty and aggressive raiders. Whether it be from the goodness of your own heart, for expected riches, or for the fun of it, you agree to help. The plan is simple. Get to the Pit's leader, Asher, and get the cure that he has. Easy peasy. But first, to get into the Pit unscathed, you need to look like a runaway slave. You go to a nearby slave camp and free some poor folks. But before they can leave and start living with some newfound freedom, you gotta take their clothes. Now, in proper slave attire, you're off to the Pit. The cover is simple. You're a runaway slave who had some second thoughts about escaping once seeing the bridge, mines, dogs, and sniper. A simple mistake. The weird bit is that Mex, the front gate guard, doesn't really pry too much into why you've got so much gear. Regardless, he takes it, and you're left in your ragged tatters and equipped with any concealed weapon Werner gave you. Is it suspicious? Yeah. Does Mex have the brain capacity to put 2 and 2 together? Likely not. Once in, you're to meet with the leader of the slaves, Medea, who explains your role further. You're to blend in with the other slaves, and to do that, you've got to go collect steel ingots. It sounds simple enough, but Medea tells you later that many slaves who go out into the steelyard don't make it back. It's at this point that you may start questioning what exactly you've gotten yourself into. Did you actually just get conned into willingly becoming a slave? The answer is yeah, kinda. You meet Everett, who explains what your job is and the hazards that come with it. The steel yard is filled with some pristine steel ingots scattered about, but also scattered about is more than a handful of deadly trogs. But as the ever-resourceful and very easy player that you are, it's nothing that you can't handle. You go out, get your ingots, and come back. It was actually easier than expected. After doing a bit of ingot hunting, you report back to Medea, who informs you about a lovely location called The Hole. She explains that The Hole is a death gauntlet where slaves can choose to participate in order to fight for their freedom. Of course, winning this death arena is a part of Werner and Medea's plan, so you go to sign up. The Hole takes place with 3 separate battles before you can earn your freedom. The first is you are fighting against other slaves. The second is against 2 of Asher's more prominent raider soldiers, the Bear Brothers, and the last is against a guy named Gruber. He drops a cool weapon, so no making fun of his name. Once these folks have been defeated, you are officially free. You've done it. You've broken free from the chains that you voluntarily put on. Congrats. Next step, an audience with the big boss man. But first, gotta find that locker that holds all your stuff. It looks like mechs didn't keep any of it. I mean, they're raiders, I guess, not burglars. You take a stroll through the Pitt Raiders' quarters in Uptown and realize that it's not much better than anywhere else in the pit. Sure, you might not hear the constant ruckus of auto axes, but it's still plagued by the trog contagion and horrendous air quality. At the end of Uptown, you're met with Asher's base of operations, a skyscraper dubbed Haven. After taking an elevator to the upper floors, you're finally face to face with the Lord of the Pit. It's through the meeting with Asher that several revelations are made. Unlike Mex and some of the other raiders, he understands that a newly acquired slave who survives the steelyard and beats the arena in such a short span is no ordinary slave. Combine this feat with hearing rumors of a slave revolt, and Asher is able to quickly suss you out. But rather than having you executed or something along those lines, he instead just recontextualizes Werner's demands and your business in the pit. It's in this conversation that it's revealed to the player that Werner was once the right-hand man of Asher. Before Werner was a slave, he was one of the top pit raiders, a vital piece of information that was previously withheld from you in your initial dealings with Werner. Asher makes you a counter-offer. Put an end to Werner and his plan, and you'll be considered Asher's new lieutenant. But before you can continue your conversation further, Asher is interrupted by a notice on the intercom that demands his attention. He bids you farewell, tells you to talk to his wife Sandra for more about the cure, and trusts that you'll make the right decision about putting an end to Werner's plot. Asher leaves, and you head to the next room to talk to Sandra. It's through this conversation that it's revealed that Asher and the Raiders don't actually have a physical cure to the TDC, but rather they have something that they hope will lead to a cure. It's revealed that Asher and Sandra's baby daughter, Marie, is completely immune to mutations and radiation that the pit reeks of. And it is here where the moral dilemma of the Pitt DLC is finally revealed. The physical choice that you have to make is quite simple. Do you take the baby or leave it? The moral implications are not as simple. Let's talk about it. First off, let's address the biggest problem that the pit faces, the big S word, slavery. Slavery is universally considered to be one of the most despicable things that humans can do to each other, and any person that partakes in the slave trade is a despicable individual. This includes Asher, but this also includes Werner, both the characters that petition for the Lone Wanderer's aid. The only redeeming qualities between both characters is that they both claim that they want to free the slaves from their chains. When asked why he keeps slaves, Asher states, I wish it wasn't necessary, but we need the labor to keep the city functioning. We don't have the leisure of laziness. Soldiers fight trogs and get food from outside of town. Workers need to supply them with ammo and gear. Everyone has to do their part, or we all die. Until we have a cure for the pit, the city has no children. People die, so we need new people. And sometimes that means buying them. He further states, but someday soon, we'll have a cure, and we won't need forced labor. The workers will be free, and the city can grow naturally. So he sees the slaves as a temporary solution for their population problems. Not ideal, but Asher does state that he wishes to see an end to forced labor. On the other hand, from the get-go, Werner has been adamant about freeing the pit's slaves. The distress call he puts out asks the listener to come help him free his people. He states that once they have the cure, they can bargain for their freedom. Werner also wants to free the slaves. His way of freeing the slaves will also be faster, as once the lone wanderer ensures that the slave revolt succeeds, these slaves are officially free. I mean, they still have to work the steel mill, collect steel ingots from the dangerous steel yard, and live in the pit, but they're free. Werner confirms this, saying that there's still lots of work to be done. And Medea confirms it when asked if things have gotten better. She says, "You better believe it. No more beatings, no more forced work, no more slaves being brought here in chains. You did some good work. Of course, we've got all new problems now that Asher and the taskmasters are gone. Not enough food getting brought in, for one thing. Werner said he'll organize scavenging parties, but I think he'd rather stay up in the bar than actually do any leading." This conversation sort of hints at Werner's true motivations and the state that the pit is in after Asher is killed and the slaves have been liberated. So both Asher and Werner want to see these slaves be freed. Now let's get into their differences. Despite Asher's belief that slave labor is necessary for the pit's success, the former Brotherhood of Steel member does his best to ensure a fair treatment for them. Whenever the player character mentions the slaves, Asher is sure to correct the player by calling them workers. He further says, "I know some of my soldiers are harsher than they need to be. Usually it's the ones who were raiders before they signed up here. The workers need to be pushed, but I don't tolerate cruelty for cruelty's sake. The soldiers who used to be workers know where to draw the line. I can't stop all the abuse, but when someone goes too far, I make sure they're strung up around town as an example." So while the slaves are of course treated poorly, Asher does his best to punish the soldiers who take it too far. Again, I'm not excusing the act of participating in the slave trade, I'm merely pointing out how Asher views his slaves. On the other hand, although he hides it well at first, Werner is completely apathetic towards the pit slaves. He couldn't care less about them. The most obvious example of this is when you confront him at his hideout. In a rage, Werner says, "You know what? F this city and f the raiders, f the slaves, and f you too, fucker." Werner reveals his hand. He doesn't actually care about freeing the slaves at all. He only cared about getting the revenge against Asher for exiling him. The Fallout 3 game guide confirms this, stating, he harbors a grudge against the city and against Asher in particular. He has no particular love for the slaves, and he sees a plan to kidnap Asher's baby as a way to get back at the pit's ruler and the city in general. It really makes you wonder if Werner is going to do his best to make the pit the industrial powerhouse that Asher one day envisions and promises. Another example where Werner reveals his true feelings towards slaves happens before even going to the pit for the first time. Werner informs the player about a group of slavers near his makeshift camp who are holding some slaves. Werner suggests getting a disguise from one of them. The player can respond by saying, "Disguise or not, I should rescue those slaves." And Werner's response is, "Whatever, just get the outfit off one of them while you're playing hero." That kind of attitude doesn't really give off the liberator of all pit slaves vibe that Werner tries to express in his other conversations. The guy comes across as quite slimy, only truly caring about getting back at his former boss. So, you've got a guy who says that he's the best at treating slaves like they're not slaves, as if that was even possible, and another guy who doesn't care all too much about them at all. Not the greatest of people to align yourself with. But the subject of slavery isn't the only concern when it comes to choosing a side. The lone wanderer stands before a baby's crib. They can either kidnap the baby from its parents and give it to a pair of complete strangers, one of who has a death grudge against the baby's father, or leave it with the two parents who, of course, love it unconditionally. Is kidnapping a baby something that you can live with? I'd imagine for most, it's not. And so you've got this sort of trolley problem type scenario, where in order to free the pit slaves, you must choose to kidnap a baby. It's the symbol for absolute evil, slavery, pitted against the paragon of innocence, a newborn baby. To take no action results in keeping the status quo, but taking action irreparably disrupts the life of a person who had no agency in how the pit came to be. Marie is an innocent child who, if kidnapped, will serve as a pawn to advance Werner's goals. Furthermore, Marie is more than just an ordinary baby at that. Within her exists the antibodies that could put an end to the suffering of all pit locals. She could be the one to bring order, hope, and growth to what is an otherwise hostile land. And while both Sandra and Medea can be seen working towards a cure if the player sides with Asher and Werner respectively, one has to wonder which would have more success. A scientist by trade who is working in a clean, sanitary, and safe lab, or someone who has lived their whole life as a slave and is working in a dank and makeshift lab in the hostile steelyard. If I were a betting man, I know which I'd choose. Still, it's by far not an easy decision to make. Now, with the way I've been talking, you might think that I'd advocate for siding with Asher, but I won't. What I will say is that I don't think there is a truly good option for the people of the pit. You're either stuck with a leader who uses despicable means to bring growth to his ravaged and hostile settlement, or with an apathetic leader who only cared about getting revenge and being the lord of the pit. The slaves are either free, but still required to do hard labor, or they're enslaved and can only pray that finding a cure will lead to their freedom. In one scenario, the city will continue to survive, but under a harsh rule, and in the other, you'll have a leader who will let the city fall back into ruins. And so I believe that Fallout 3's Pitt DLC is a great example of the moral ambiguity that Fallout tries so hard to emulate and portray in their games and world. Neither Asher's or Werner's plan provides a beacon of hope for the people of the pit, but as the player, in order to complete the DLC, you must make a decision. You're not deciding between two good options. You're not really even deciding between two vile options. Instead, the pit is challenging you to make a decision that you think is appropriate and conforms to your own values. You can either choose to trust that Asher will stick to his word about freeing the slaves and bringing positive change to the pit once they develop the cure, or you can choose to put your faith into Werner and Medea and hope that Werner's lust for revenge will be satiated and that he will become the person to bring the pit back from hardship. With either option you choose, as the game doesn't really provide a true ending to the pit, you'll just have to trust the word of the side that you chose. As you leave the ruins of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, you're left forever wondering if you made the right decision. In a world with limited choice, sometimes having hope is the only right one. That's it from me today, folks. If you liked the video, be sure to share and subscribe. Join the Discord. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.
The pit's a mess. Nearly everyone who lives there is either sick, dying, or worse. It's the water and the air. You can't escape it.